It was just another day in Ohio, or so JD Vance thought. He'd been walking home after a long day at work, his mind preoccupied with thoughts about his latest book and the challenges ahead. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in shades of orange and pink, but something caught his eye, a figure leaning heavily against two wooden sticks. An elderly man shuffled slowly along the sidewalk, using what looked like makeshift crutches carved from tree branches. His clothes were worn, patched in places, and he moved with great difficulty, each step seeming to take all his strength. JD stopped dead in his tracks. There was something familiar about this man, though he couldn't quite place it. JD hesitated for only a moment before crossing the street to approach him. "Sir," JD said gently, "do you need help?" The old man turned toward him, revealing weathered features etched deep by time and hardship. For a second, their eyes locked, and JD felt a strange jolt, as if he'd seen those eyes somewhere before. "But where?" "Help?" the man repeated, his voice gravelly yet steady. "No one's ever offered me help before." That line stuck with JD. It echoed in his head like a warning bell, urging him to dig deeper. Who was this man? Why did he seem so out of place in modern America? And why did JD feel an inexplicable connection to him? As they began talking, JD learned that the man's name was Harold. He lived alone in a small cabin miles away, surviving on odd jobs and handouts from neighbors. But there was more to Harold than met the eye, and soon, JD would uncover secrets buried deep within the man's past. Secrets that could change everything. What JD didn't know yet was that this chance encounter wasn't random. In fact, it might be the most important meeting of his life. Harold's cabin was tucked away in a quiet corner of the woods, far from the bustling towns JD knew so well. It was a modest place, with peeling paint and windows fogged by age, but inside it told a story of its own. Shelves lined with dusty books, walls adorned with faded photographs, and a fireplace that seemed to hold decades' worth of memories. As JD sat across from Harold, sipping tea brewed from herbs grown in the garden outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than he'd initially thought. Harold spoke softly, his words measured and deliberate, as if choosing them carefully before letting them out into the world. "I've lived here for over 40 years, Harold said, gesturing around the room. "But I wasn't always alone." JD leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened?" Harold sighed, staring into the fire as if searching for answers within its flickering flames. "Life happens, son. People come and go. Some leave because they have to, others because they choose to, but sometimes people disappear without a trace." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. JD felt a chill run down his spine, even though the fire crackled warmly nearby. He wanted to ask more, to press Harold for details, but the old man's expression stopped him. There was pain there, raw and unspoken, and JD knew better than to rush someone carrying such burdens. Instead, he asked a simpler question. "Why are you living like this? You could get proper crutches, maybe even move somewhere closer to town." Harold chuckled bitterly. "Proper crutches cost money, boy. And moving, what would be the point? This is my home now." But JD sensed there was more to it, something deeper, something Harold wasn't ready to share just yet. As the evening wore on, JD found himself drawn further into Harold's world, a world filled with mystery, regret, and perhaps even danger. Before leaving, JD promised to return the next day with supplies and company. Harold nodded, though his eyes betrayed a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "Be careful who you trust, JD," he warned cryptically. "Not everyone wants the truth to come to light." Those words replayed in JD's mind long after he left the cabin, driving back through the darkening countryside. Who were these people Harold spoke of, and why did their existence seem to threaten everything he held dear? True to his word, JD returned the next morning with groceries, fresh blankets, and a pair of sturdy crutches he'd borrowed from a local clinic. Harold greeted him with a grateful smile, but there was an edge of tension in his demeanor that hadn't been there the day before. "Did you sleep well?" JD asked as they settled into the living room. As well as anyone can, when shadows linger, Harold replied cryptically. JD frowned. Shadows. Harold hesitated, then nodded toward the window. Out there, watching. JD glanced outside but saw nothing unusual, just trees swaying gently in the breeze. Still, the comment unsettled him. Was Harold imagining things, or was there something more sinister at play? Determined to get to the bottom of it, JD spent the afternoon helping Harold around the cabin, listening intently whenever the old man shared fragments of his past. Bits and pieces began to form a picture. Harold had once worked for a powerful organization, one shrouded in secrecy and influence. He'd seen things most people couldn't comprehend, and done things he wished he could forget. You don't know what it's like, Harold said suddenly, breaking the silence as they sat by the fire later that evening. To carry secrets so heavy they threaten to crush you. JD looked at him sharply. What kind of secrets? Harold stared into the flames, his face unreadable. Secrets that could bring down empires. The statement hit JD like a punch to the gut. Empires. What did Harold mean? Was he talking about governments, corporations, or something else entirely? Before JD could press further, a noise outside startled them both. A low creak, followed by the rustle of leaves. Harold stiffened, gripping the armrests of his chair tightly. "They're here," he whispered. "Who's here?" JD demanded, standing up and peering out the window. This time, he didn't see just trees. He spotted movement, faint but unmistakable, near the edge of the woods. "They've been waiting for me to slip up," Harold muttered, his voice barely audible. "But I won't give them the satisfaction." JD turned back to him, urgency in his tone. "We need to call someone. The police, maybe?" Harold shook his head fiercely. "No cops, they wouldn't understand. And besides," he paused, glancing nervously toward the door, "I doubt they'd even make it this far." A chill ran down JD's spine. If Harold was right, whoever was after him wasn't playing by the rules, and neither could JD if he hoped to protect the old man. As night fell, the atmosphere grew heavier. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, whispers carried on the wind, and the sense of danger became almost palpable. JD knew he had to act fast. But first he needed answers, answers only Harold could provide. "Tell me everything," JD urged, sitting down beside him again. "Everything you've kept hidden, because whatever's coming we face it together." For a long moment, Harold said nothing. Then finally he began to speak, and the story he told would change JD's life forever. Harold's voice was steady, as he recounted his past, but each word carried the weight of years of secrecy and regret. "I used to work for an organization," Harold began. "Not one you'd find listed in any directory, or mentioned in the news. They called themselves the Order. At first I thought they were doing good, protecting people, keeping dangerous information out of the wrong hands. But over time, I realized the truth. The Order wasn't protecting anyone but themselves." JD listened intently, his pulse quickening with every revelation. What kind of information? Information that could topple governments, expose corruption on a global scale, and reveal truths so unsettling that entire societies might crumble under the weight of them. Harold explained. "I saw things, JD, things no man should ever see, and when I tried to walk away, they made sure I paid the price." JD's mind raced. Was Harold talking about classified government operations, corporate espionage, or something even darker? Before he could ask, Harold continued. "One night, I stumbled upon a file, a single document that contained enough evidence to bring down the Order. I knew I had to act, but by then they already suspected me. That's why I ended up here, living off the grid, using sticks as crutches, because they took everything from me, even my dignity." JD felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. "Why didn't you go to the authorities, or leak the information?" Harold laughed bitterly. "Because the Order has eyes everywhere, ears in every corner. They control politicians, media outlets, law enforcement, you name it. If I went public, I'd be silenced faster than you can blink." Just as JD processed this staggering claim, another noise shattered the tense silence, a loud thud outside, followed by muffled voices. Both men froze, their hearts pounding in unison. "They're closer now," Harold whispered, panic creeping into his voice. Much closer. JD sprang into action, grabbing a flashlight and heading toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered. "I'll check it out." But before he could step outside, Harold grabbed his arm. "Wait, there's something else you need to know." JD turned back, his breath catching in his throat. "What is it?" Harold hesitated, clearly torn between fear and necessity. Finally, he spoke the words that would change everything. "The file isn't just any document. It contains your name." JD stared at him, stunned. My name?" Harold nodded solemnly. "You're part of this, whether you realize it or not. Your family, your career, everything you hold dear could be at risk if the Order finds out you're involved." JD reeled from the revelation. How could this be possible? What connection did he have to the Order, or to Harold himself? As questions swirled in his mind, the situation outside grew dire. Footsteps approached the cabin, heavy and deliberate, sending a chill down JD's spine. "We don't have much time," Harold urged. "If we're going to survive this, we need to move now." With no other choice, JD nodded. Together, they prepared for whatever lay ahead, knowing full well that their lives, and perhaps many others, depended on the choices they made next. The cabin door rattled violently, under a series of forceful kicks. JD and Harold exchanged a glance. There was no denying it anymore. They were surrounded. "Stay behind me," JD whispered, positioning himself between Harold and the door. His heart thundered in his chest as he gripped the flashlight tightly, ready to use it as a weapon if necessary. From outside came a voice, calm but menacing. "We know you're in there, Harold. Open up, or we'll make this messy." Harold's hands trembled as he clutched the edge of his chair. "They mean business," he murmured. "If we don't act fast, we won't stand a chance." JD scanned the room quickly, searching for an escape route. The back window offered the only viable option, but it meant leaving everything behind, including evidence that could incriminate the Order. Still, survival had to come first. "Come on," JD said, helping Harold to his feet. "We're getting out of here." With Harold leaning heavily on him, JD carefully navigated toward the window. Just as they reached it, another crash echoed through the cabin. The front door had given way. Footsteps thundered inside, growing louder with each passing second. "We don't have time," JD hissed, lifting Harold onto the windowsill. "Go." Harold hesitated for a split second before climbing out, wincing as his injured leg protested the movement. JD followed close behind, landing hard on the damp ground outside. The cold night air stung his lungs as he helped Harold stagger toward the dense woods. Behind them, shouts erupted. After them. "Don't let them get away." Adrenaline surged through JD's veins as he pulled Harold deeper into the forest. Branches clawed at their clothes, and roots threatened to trip them at every step, but neither man dared slow down. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, accompanied by the faint glow of flashlights cutting through the darkness. "We can't keep running forever," Harold panted, struggling to keep pace. "They'll catch us eventually." JD glanced around frantically, desperate for a plan. Then his eyes landed on an old wooden shed half hidden among the trees. It wasn't much, but it might buy them some time. "In there," JD pointed, guiding Harold toward the structure. Inside, the air smelled musty, and the floor creaked beneath their weight, but it provided temporary shelter from prying eyes. "Now what?" Harold asked, collapsing onto a pile of hay. JD knelt beside him, his mind racing. "We need to turn the tables on them. If they think we're cornered, maybe we can lure them into a trap." Harold raised an eyebrow. "A trap? With what?" JD looked around the small space, spotting a few tools scattered across the floor. A rusty saw, a coil of rope, and a bucket of oil caught his attention. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Trust me," JD said, already formulating a plan. "Just stay quiet and let me handle this." Minutes later, JD emerged from the shed, moving stealthily through the trees. He positioned the tools strategically along the path leading to their hiding spot, ensuring they'd be triggered if anyone stepped too close. Then, taking a deep breath, he called out into the night, "We're over here, come and get us." His voice carried through the forest, drawing immediate attention. From the shadows emerged several figures, their faces obscured by masks, their movements deliberate and calculated. JD held his ground, feigning confidence, despite the fear coursing through him. "You shouldn't have meddled in things you don't understand," one of the men growled, raising a weapon. JD smirked, though his insides churned with dread. "Maybe not, but now I know enough to stop you." Before the man could respond, the trap sprang into action. The oil spilled across the ground, igniting instantly when struck by sparks from the saw blade JD had rigged earlier. Flames erupted, cutting off the pursuers' path, and forcing them to retreat in chaos. For a moment, silence reigned. JD turned back toward the shed, relief washing over him, as he found Harold waiting anxiously inside. "It worked," Harold breathed, disbelief coloring his tone. "You actually did it." But JD knew better than to celebrate too soon. The order wouldn't give up easily, not after coming so close to reclaiming what they believed belonged to them. And with JD's name tied to the file, his involvement had only just begun. As dawn broke over the forest, JD and Harold emerged from their makeshift shelter, weary but alive. The night's chaos had left its mark: scorched earth, scattered debris and lingering smoke, but they'd managed to evade capture. "For now, we need to get out of here," JD said firmly, helping Harold steady himself. "They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll come back stronger." Harold nodded, his expression grim. "Agreed, but first we need to secure that file. If the order finds it, all this will have been for nothing." JD's stomach tightened at the mention of the file. He still didn't fully understand why his name was in it, or what secrets it held, but he knew one thing for certain: it wasn't safe in Harold's possession anymore. Not if the order would go to such lengths to retrieve it. "Where is it?" JD asked. Harold hesitated, then reached into the pocket of his worn jacket. From it, he pulled a small USB drive, its surface scratched and weathered. "It's all here," he said simply. "Everything you need to know, and more than you ever wanted to." JD took the drive, feeling its weight in his hand. It was tiny, insignificant looking, yet it carried the potential to change everything. His life, Harold's safety, even the world beyond. They all hinged on what was stored inside. "What happens next?" JD asked, glancing at Harold. The old man sighed, leaning heavily on his crutches. "That's up to you, son. I've done my part. Now it's your turn to decide whether to bury the truth or expose it." JD considered the weight of those words as they made their way through the forest, heading toward civilization, or at least somewhere safer than the cabin. Each step brought new questions. Who could he trust? How far would the order go to silence him? And most importantly, what did the file reveal about his connection to them? By mid-morning, they reached the edge of town, where JD flagged down a passing car. A kind stranger agreed to drive them to a nearby city, no questions asked. As they drove away, JD couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching them from the rearview mirror. Once they arrived, Harold insisted on parting ways. "I've caused you enough trouble already," he said gruffly, though JD noticed the flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, JD, and remember, some truths are worth fighting for." With that, Harold disappeared into the crowd, leaving JD alone with the USB drive and a million unanswered questions. Back at his hotel room, JD hesitated before inserting the drive into his laptop. The screen loaded slowly, revealing folder after folder of encrypted files. One stood out, however, a document labeled simply, "Vance Connection." JD clicked it open, his breath catching as lines of text appeared on the screen. The words blurred together at first, but as he read further, his blood ran cold. The file detailed not only his family's ties to the order, but also a conspiracy that stretched generations deep. Before he could process the implications, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Answering it, he heard a voice laced with menace. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, JD. Drop the investigation, or someone very close to you might pay the price." The line went dead, leaving JD staring at the phone in stunned silence. He realized then that this was only the beginning. The order wouldn't stop until they silenced everyone who threatened their secrets, including him. But JD Vance wasn't about to back down. Armed with the truth, and fueled by determination, he vowed to uncover every last detail, no matter the cost. Because sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. And so, the real fight began. As JD stared at the screen, another message flashed across it, a single sentence typed in bold letters. "Welcome to the game, JD. Let's see how long you survive." What does the file truly contain? Who else is involved in the conspiracy? And can JD protect himself and those he loves from the order's deadly reach? Find out in part 2, coming soon.